right. Well, hang on to your seats, folks, because we're going to go through this fast. I've got my timer going. We're in our series where we're exploring the connection between the spirituality, the spirituality of our ancestors in the Christian tradition, alongside the wisdom from indigenous ways of being and thinking. And so it's been. I hope you've enjoyed it. Have you enjoyed it? Anybody? Anybody raise your hand? Well, you came back, so that's good. Maybe you're just full of grace. I love it. And so we're going to continue in that series. We've talked about. This is really about how do we kind of live out in our everyday normal lives a way that produces healing in us. That's kind of the heart of this series. And we've explored movement. We have explored rest. Did anybody adjust your sleeping area this past week? Did anybody do that? Not just me? Okay. Some of you kind of, you're like, I'll sleep a lot better without this person in the bed. You got to go. Maybe that's what you did. I don't know. I'm so inappropriate. I'm sorry. But if you'd like to get together and have coffee, my phone number is in the program. Very happy to do that anytime. How many have ever seen the movie or gone to the play Little Shop of Horrors? Anybody seen Little Shop of Horrors, right? What's the big famous line from that show? Oh, wow. It was like totally dramatic, too. You do not have to give a donation today. You have your presence was your gift today. Absolutely. I love it, right? It's a bit over-the-top dramatic story, right, of this plant that develops a hunger, right, for human flesh, right? And you hear this voice, feed me, Seymour, right? And so Seymour is trying to meet the demands of this plant, and it really causes a problem, right? This little flower quickly becomes a monster that devours everything in its sight, right? Including Seymour's conscience, right? As he feeds this thing. Now, you and I probably don't have a bloodthirsty plant in our kitchen, right? I mean, I say, raise your hand if you have a bloodthirsty plant in your kitchen. Most of us would be like, I have a cactus, I have a cacti. Here or there, a few cacti, But at the end of the day, we've all probably heard the voice of Audrey, in our hearts, right? That voice that's feed me more sugar. Anybody? I love sugar. I'm not going to lie. Love it. Feed me something fast, right? Or feed me whatever numbs this feeling. Or feed me whatever everybody else is having. It doesn't really matter whether it's good for me or not. And like Seymour, what do? We just keep feeding that hunger, hoping that it goes away, hoping that somehow it brings us peace or joy, whatever it might be. But the truth is that will just grow louder and louder and oftentimes more demanding. But here's the real twist about it, right? I don't know that food is the problem. Some of you just realized, oh no, he's talking about food today. I actually am talking about food, but I want to talk more about eating and less about food as we think about wellness. But here's the twist of it all. Food isn't the problem. It's our mindset about food. It's how we engage with food, right? It's the relationship that we form with eating that becomes a bit of an issue in our lives. Because here's the truth, and here's the real tension around things like food, right? Food can be a monster or it can be medicine. Would you agree with that? Some of you are like, yeah, let's just receive the donations, the Connect cards, and get out of here because that's the truth, right? Food can feed our anxiety, and food can heal our souls, right? Food can actually heal our souls. It can numb us, or it can nourish us. We have this great line in the Gospel of John where John has Jesus say, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never grow hungry. Now, was Jesus offering us a diet plan there? No, right? Jesus was giving us something to understand about sacred nourishment, that there is something deeper, there's something more sustaining that's found in our spiritual ways of being than anything that a microwave or wrapped in a candy bar or whatever could bring us. So today I want to look at some wisdom to help us shift our mindset, shift our relationship with food and with eating, right? We want to explore not necessarily what we're eating, not necessarily what's because I'm not a nutritionist, okay? I know you look at me and you see all these muscles and you think, he definitely has it together. Some of you couldn't not laugh. You tried so hard because you were like, I feel like a junior higher making fun of the kid at junior high that Ryan probably was. So I hope you feel bad about yourself today, right? But the truth is, I want to talk about how we feed ourselves. And the wisdom that can come in how we feed ourselves can actually produce hope and life and joy and be a source of healing, which I think will then affect the what of our eating, right? Because we live in this world that's filled with the feed me, see more appetites, that way of eating. But I think if we can pause and remember and think about food, real food, eating, think about eating as sacred eating, sacred food, as meant to be a space of healing and connection and life. It's why our spiritual ancestors in antiquity, the Jewish people, they had very strict laws around eating, very strict ways of who they could and couldn't eat with because they recognized the sacredness of food. And it goes back all the way to the book of Genesis. If you're familiar with the Bible, Genesis is the first book in our Christian scriptures, which is is a combination of Jewish scriptures and the New Testament. But the Hebrew scripture starts with this book, Genesis. You got to go all the way back to Genesis to this crazy story of Noah. How many of you have ever heard the story of Noah? You don't have to be much of a church person to hear this story of genocide. Anybody? You didn't see that one coming, some of you. Like, oh, wait, he's right. It is. So I want to acknowledge before I read a couple verses from the story of Noah that if we take this story literally, God is a genocidal monster, okay? So how about we not take the story literally? Are you down with that? Okay, so let's start with that, right? The story of Genesis, the story of Noah is an ancestral story. It's a story of beginnings. It's a story of understanding the world around them. It's a story that makes sense of big ideas and big topics, but is not a story we ought to take literally. We should take it seriously, though. But I don't know that you can take it seriously and take it literally at the same time. And the other reason why I don't take it literally is because I don't see Jesus in genocide, okay? And the story of Noah is basically God destroying everybody but one family. And I'm going to tell you right now, that family was not that good, okay? I mean, they were probably good peeps, but come on. Out of the whole planet, there's only one family worth it, right? So we can acknowledge when I say things like this, we can take a breath and go, God's not a genocidal monster. This is an ancestral story. I don't know if you know it or not, but our ancestors were tribal people, spiritually speaking. Like the Jews were the 12 tribes of Israel, okay? Some of y'all think they were Western suburban people, but they weren't, okay? They were very agrarian in nature, all right? And so this is an ancestral story. It's a meaning-making story, okay? And if you're not familiar with the story of Noah, it's basically a flood story. Every ancient culture that we know of in the Mediterranean region has a flood story, okay? This is not unique to the Jews. In fact, the Jewish people, our spiritualists, they probably adapted and adopted this flood narrative from a different culture, okay? I hope you're all right. I realize I'm just saying some stuff that some of you might be here like, what is going on right now? But we can have coffee, okay? We can have coffee. Just take a breath with me, okay? That should be hope, though. Hopefully you feel a little bit of hope that Noah doesn't necessarily have to be a literal story. But Noah builds a boat. Flood comes. Everything is destroyed. He's rescued. At the end, the boat finds dry land. They've never found the ark. People are still looking. It was kind of big, but, they get dry land. And then there's this, exchange that happens between God and Noah, and what is called in some circles in scholarship as the Noahic covenant. Some of you might have heard of the Abrahamic covenant, the covenant with Abraham, but in this story, God makes a covenant with Noah, and this is where God covenants that the rainbow is a sign that I'll never destroy the earth like this again. Now, could you imagine ancient people seeing a rainbow going, I wonder what that's all about? And then somebody going, oh, well, let me tell you a story. That feels like it makes more sense than God's a genocidal monster, So at any rate, so the rainbow. And then there's this interesting, in this covenant, what you eat is expanded on, okay? What you eat is expanded on. So in Genesis chapter 9, verses 3 and 4, this is what God is saying, is being saying, every moving thing that lives will be food for you. Everything that lives will be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. So our spiritual ancestors right? They recognized that food was a gift. It wasn't an entitlement, that there was this relational aspect, that God had established food as a gift. God gives the gift. And this marks a shift because previously, up until this point in Genesis, only plants were given for food. Right? How many of you enjoy a good hamburger? See, you like the story of Noah. Okay? The genocide part, not so much. The cookout afterwards, yes, absolutely. The grilling, we're in for, okay? But now, right, the eating of moving things, of animals, is permitted, but with limits, okay? Now, here's what's interesting. Like, food is a divine concession. It's a gift. It's not a right. Oh. Like, our spiritual ancestors thought this way. They didn't think food was a right, that I have the right to everything, to whatever I want, whenever I want it, as much of it as I want. They recognized that there was a divine relationship with food. And the text goes on and it says this, only you don't eat flesh with its life. That is, its blood. In other words, you don't eat raw meat. Can I get an amen? Right? You drain the blood out of it because that's where the life force was. Right? So in antiquity, especially you can read this throughout certain passages within the Jewish scripture, blood is a very important, because blood is where the life was. Right? There was this understanding, this recognition that the blood that belonged, the life that belonged to the divine, that belonged to the Creator, was in the blood. That's where life was found, and that's not yours to take. That's what our spiritual ancestors believed. So the prohibition against consuming blood, right, is this signifier that life belongs to God, not humans. It's not ours to mess with. It's not ours to think about. Life belongs to God. That was the way our spiritual ancestors thought. They believed that food came with a moral responsibility. The life of the animal, the life of the vegetation, it didn't belong to them. It belonged to God. And even when eating for survival, even when this idea that there had to be reverence for it. So from the very beginning, right, within our tradition, there was this understanding that eating was never purely utilitarian. It was never just this thing that you did so that you had enough energy to get through the next day. Eating always involved relationship with Creator and creation. And that's within the ancestry of Christianity, of our spiritual heritage. Now, there's some pretty amazing ancestral wisdom from Indigenous people that lines up really powerfully. Ancestral wisdom from Indigenous folks would tell us that food is medicine, that there's healing power to food. In The 7 Circles, this book that I've been exploring and have encouraged you to read if you like to, that talks about some of these principles, right? It explores how food, yes, gives us energy, but what we consume, right, because of that energy is not just physical energy that the food gives us. Food can give us spiritual energy, emotional energy, mental energy. And you know that if you pause and think about your own life, right? You know that in what would be an a priori way, right? You don't necessarily need a big experiment to prove that. You know, like you've eaten something and you've been energized physically. You've eaten something and you've been energized emotionally because it reminded you of someone or something. You've eaten something and all of a sudden you've found yourself mentally clarified. You've come and had communion here and you have felt spiritually something. Food brings with it energy. It is medicinal in nature. And Indigenous wisdom teaches us that food is not simply for survival or pleasure, but it is medicine. And it can heal or it can harm you, just like any medicine we take. It can heal and it can harm, but it depends on how we leverage this, how we use this. And this really does challenge our Western mindset of food, right? When we think of food as fuel or as a commodity, right? This way of thinking, it reorients us to a totally different approach with our food, that we approach it with intentionality, that we approach it with gratitude, with discernment, that we recognize that it is interconnected. We ourselves are interconnected with our sources of food, whether it be vegetation or whether it be living beings. And so sacred wisdom, sacred nourishment, sacred eating honors that connection between the land and between like our identity as people. This is another beautiful piece of ancestral wisdom, is that sacred nourishment says where you exist is part of who you are. right? So the food circle, right? We've been talking about the medicine wheel and these different healing circles. Like the food circle, right, is about this reconnection to understanding how traditional food systems within the areas in which we live or within our own ancestry, like where you came from, where I came from, that reconnects us to something. And colonization disrupts all of that. Colonization that comes in and says, everybody's got to be like this. This is the right way to think, the right way to eat, the right way to worship. All of those things, it disrupts all of that. And in this country, it certainly disrupted indigenous food ways. And it replaced them with all kinds of things, processed and unhealthy alternatives. Right? But there's some incredible wisdom about reclaiming the traditional foods as this way of healing and embracing a culture and a heritage. And that's such powerful thinking within indigenous communities. Right? Indigenous communities would teach that when we eat food that comes from our very own region, our cultural tradition, we're not just eating, but we're remembering who we are. Like, how many of you have ever had the opportunity to visit kind of your ancestral home, maybe outside of America? Because this isn't your ancestral home unless you're indigenous person. I don't know if you know that or not, but you've been able to do that. There's something about when you get there, what do you want to try? All the food, right? You want to try all the food, right? And it reconnects you. And you're like, oh, these are my people. This is my food. And I love to go and experience other people's food and other people's cultures, right? And no, this is so foreign to me, but it kind of welcomes me and it brings me in. And in some sense, it helps me remember who I am because I go, this isn't a part of my heritage. And this is disgusting. But it connects me to who I am, maybe, right? But mindful eating, indigenous wisdom also teaches us is a spiritual act, right? Eating is this spiritual act. It's a moment to honor the life that was given for us to eat, the labor involved in us to eat, and the creator who sustains it all. That's what indigenous wisdom would teach us. And so every meal can be a ceremony. Every time we sit down, we can approach it with presence and mindfulness and gratitude. And this echoes, like our spiritual ancestry, this echoes what our spiritual ancestors talked about in our scriptures of shared meals as sacred. We think of the shared meal of Jesus and the disciples. The Last Supper is often called. We think of the shared meals that happened around holidays like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. These things were part of the heritage of Judaism. And in Jesus, as Christians, we don't co-opt those things, but we recognize that there's something really powerful that Jesus represents in those feast days. And so we embrace this idea that nourishment and spirituality, they're intertwined. And so sacred nourishment is really about reciprocity and respect. It's about sitting down to the meal, respecting the people that are at the meal, respecting what's on the plate, right? Doing our best to not take advantage and to consume food that has been exploited or taken without acknowledgement. Right? There's something powerful about it. And indigenous foodways practice this. They practice an honoring of the animal and the plant and the water, and they give something back. How many of you ever heard of or read any part of the book Braiding Sweetgrass? Has anybody ever heard of this wonderful book? I've just read bits and pieces of it. Everybody who reads it, they're like, you got to read Braiding Sweetgrass. So if those of you that have read it, somebody lead a book study small group on it, okay? I'm commissioning you to do that. And we'll have a whole bunch of people, probably 4,000, that'll sign up for your book conversation. But in Braiding Sweetgrass, it talks about sweet grass, not sweet grass, sweet grass. It talks about something called the honorable harvest. And the honorable harvest was this idea that you take what you need, you give back in return, you act with gratitude, humility, and respect around your food. Right? You give something back. And the author writes this: take only what you need, use everything you take. How many of us are notorious for putting more food on our plate than we're going to actually eat? Right? You take what you share it, be grateful, sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. Like living into this principle, living into this way of thinking can reshape how we think about sourcing our food. And we all of a sudden start thinking about the ethics of it, and we think locally. And what are the regenerative practices that actually can honor the earth, right? That honors us, that provides for us. So as we think about food, here's what I don't want you to miss. I don't want you to walk out of here going, I'm not allowed to have an oatmeal cream pie. And I just say that because I saw oatmeal cream pies in our pantry just then in my head, right? Ryan said, I've got to eat, kale. And I'm only allowed to eat corn that's grown in Indiana. Or where am I? Colorado, beef, whatever. I think of Indiana, I think corn, because I had to shuck corn sometimes. It was an awful experience. Made me one with the land, though, I guess. Isn't there a grocery store? That's what I said. That was the most offensive joke I've ever said here, by the way. My little grocery store bit got me some flack. So for those of you, or gardening, really, those of you that are gardeners, it was just a joke. I appreciate gardening. I'm just not good at it. So I make fun of people that are. That's my Achilles heel, I guess. Right? But don't miss this. Like, don't walk out of here going, Ryan, and the Bible says you're not allowed to have sugar. Okay, I'm not saying no, okay? None of that. Let's embrace food and meal as an opportunity to recognize that we are all connected. Sacred nourishment can connect us to all living things. It can close that gap. So in your everyday normal life, as we've been thinking about loving ourselves spiritually, physically, emotionally, right? How do we do that? Right? How do we embrace this? Well, mentally, right? You love yourself mentally and embrace sacred nourishment. Remember, there's knowledge inside of food. There's story inside of food. Every ingredient carries a story. Like, get to know your food a little bit. Where does it come from? How did it get to your table? Know where it comes from. That's how you can mentally engage with this. Learn who grew that food. What land did it come from? What cultural practices shape it? If you have little kids and you're having a meal, like this today doesn't take much time. Just ask ChatGPT. I'm making spaghetti. Where does it come from? Italy. If you didn't know, it's Italian food. Like we think everything comes from America, though. We invented tamales in America. Maybe, just before it was called America, I suppose. I appreciate the slow music underneath this nonsense, Kia. I know. I said, come out at this time, so I'll shut up and we'll move forward. I know. She gave me more time, too. I was watching that. But listen, ask ChatGPT when you sit down, like, where did it come from? And I don't care if it's Lucky Charms or if you made it, like, learn about it. What did it take to get that box of Lucky Charms on your table? That's the price of it, right? But like, where did it come from? Who makes it? How many people work for that company, right? All that's so you can do that. Now, so the invitation is to learn a story about your food this week. Pick one food item, learn the story, honor the people, the land, the tradition behind it. Honor the people that work in that factory that produces that box of cereal. Honor that that's probably not the most exhilarating work for folks, but it provides for them. And that might be the best that they have. And you can be thankful for that person who worked 10 hours on that assembly line who got you your Lucky Charms. And you can be connected with that little leprechaun in a special spiritual way. But like, you can be connected with the people and those folks, right? Emotionally, food is emotional. Oh my gosh, food is emotional. Food is about connecting and belonging. Remember that meals can bake emotional bonds into our souls. And if you don't think that that's true, you go through a significant moment in your life, the very meal that you have in the middle of that storm, you will always remember. I can tell you what we ate. The day I did my father-in-law's funeral. I can tell you what we ate. Food is emotional. And embrace that. Don't run from that. That's beautiful. That connects you to the past and the future and the present. And your children, when you are long gone, they can pass that. How many of you have passed a recipe down? You got a recipe? Anybody? From somebody? Right? It's emotional, right? Family dinners are sacred feasts. You know why we had a meal together on Good Friday here? Because there's something sacred about sharing a meal together as a church, as a community. So food carries with it memories and joyful memories and grief-filled memories. And it travels with it. It's powerful. And it's more than molecules. It's divine. It carries that with it. So here's the invitation. Share a meal with someone who needs some healing, who needs to be seen or connected in the next few weeks. Let your food be an act of love. Find out what they love. Make it, buy it, whatever. Come together. Food is physical, we know this. It's medicine and it sustains us. From an Indigenous perspective, food isn't just fuel. Remember that, it's medicine. So think about what you feed your body. This is into the what. You need to figure that out. Know your body type. Learn those things. Feed your body what gives it energy, what fuels it. Right? Think about those things. Remember, your body is this sacred vessel. Our tradition teaches us that. And you can care for that vessel. You can treat it with honor. And when you do that, you're honoring our Creator. So think about your nutrition. Think about what will give you energy, what will give you mental clarity, and plan your meals and your food around that. So spiritually, how does spirituality connect? Well, food can be connected to prayer and communion. We do this every week here. I don't say it lightly when I say the main event, even though it takes less time, because really good, important, powerful things take far less time than less important, powerful. That's why I talk so much, right? But this moment, like where we come and take the bread and the juice, this is the moment of nourishment. Like this ties it all together. And eating can be an act of communion with the divine every time. I'm just going to be honest with you, I'm not a big pray before your meal person. I always thought it was kind of weird for me, felt awkward and uncomfortable. I know some people are, and I'm not here to tell you not to do that, but there's something powerful about it. I'll acknowledge that. There's something powerful about pausing and honoring and experiencing in that moment gratitude. I had a hard time with it because there's billions and billions of people on the planet starving, and I have a hard time thanking God for my meal as if God brought me my meal but didn't bring a meal to someone starving someplace else. So that's just my own neurosis. But I think there's something powerful about starting a meal as a ceremony, and maybe you do pray. Maybe you actually just start with a sense of gratitude to align yourself. You look at what's food, you take a moment, you breathe it in, smell it. Maybe you're sitting around a table and you say, hey, before we dig in, like, what are we grateful for? We do this on Thanksgiving, like once a year on a day in which we like honor genocide of indigenous peoples. It's like, what are we doing? Like every day of our lives, we could actually sit at a table and just breathe for a moment and let the food be present before it's devoured. And we could just have a moment of sacred reflection, a holy exchange with one another, right? With this great mystery of the divine. I learned that I can be thankful without having someone to be thankful to. That's a challenge. That I can have gratitude in my heart, but know that God did not provide the food on my table. Because if God provided the food on my table, then God didn't provide the food on somebody else's table. And so I can't acknowledge that. That's hard for me. But I can still be grateful that I have food on my table, and I can still honor how it got there. And so I would encourage you in your own way, figure that out. And the world becomes better for it. We become better with sacred nourishment because our actions start to align with our values, even at the table. Daily, this is a moment of integrity where we bring peacemaking into just the very things that we eat. And our values we can live them out. We can value justice and kindness and sustainability and dignity and preparation of food. And our plates can reflect that because sacred nourishment challenges unjust systems. You know, I live by this kind of rule that I got from Maya Angelou, like do the best you can, and then when you know better, do better. You can't know everything about everything on your plate in the world that we live in. But when you do know something and you can do better, do better. That's part of sacred eating. That's powerful. So sacred eating, sacred nourishment, it resists systems that exploit land and labor and animals just to save $1. And when we choose as best as we can to eat locally and ethically, regenerative foods, right, we can disrupt these economies that are oppressive. And sacred nourishment at the end of the day can restore this earth. We can live in ways that honor the earth. And I'm not great at it. I'm trying to do my best. But we can do this and we can learn. So as we have communion today, what is it that God's inviting you into? I hope that maybe you'll find out one story behind the food you eat. I hope you'll share a meal with someone this week. I hope that you'll practice a moment of sacred reflection before you eat. This song that we're singing for communion is a throwback song for those of you that have been around for 20 years. It's a trigger warning. You might be like, wait a second, what is going on? But this chorus says, this is my daily bread, your very words spoken to me. That's why we chose this song. It's a throwback. It's a chorus. It's not really a full-on song, but it says, this is the air I breathe. And it talks about having a desperation for the things of God. And when I sing this song now, I do this with most songs that have the word you in it. I think of the word love. So when I sing this song, for me, I'm singing that I'm desperate for love. And I'm desperate to experience that love, to give that love, even as I think about it's my daily bread, love. It sustains me, nourishes me, and I want to love, right? I want to respect the food that shows up on my table as well. So I invite you to stand, receive communion today as we sing this chorus together.